Sarah Martinez had always known she was different. Growing up in a small military town outside San Diego, she watched her father polish his boots every morning before heading to the naval base. The rhythm of military life shaped her childhood, the early morning reveille calls, the precise way her mother folded laundry, and the deep respect everyone showed when they saw her father's uniform. At 17, Sarah stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, but her presence filled any room she entered. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her brown eyes held a determination that made people take notice. She had inherited her father's discipline and her mother's fierce independence, creating a combination that would serve her well in the years to come. The decision to join the Navy came naturally. While her classmates talked about college parties and sorority life, Sarah dreamed of serving her country. She wanted to prove that size didn't determine strength, that heart mattered more than height. Her parents supported her choice, though her mother worried about the challenges Sarah would face as a woman in the military. Basic training at Great Lakes Naval Station was everything Sarah expected and more. The drill instructors were tough, the days were long, and the physical demands pushed every recruit to their limits. Sarah threw herself into the training with complete dedication. She mastered the obstacle courses, excelled in classroom instruction, and earned the respect of her fellow recruits through hard work and determination. After completing basic training, Sarah's exceptional performance and leadership potential caught the attention of her commanding officers. They recommended her for specialized training, and soon she found herself on a path toward becoming a Navy SEAL. The selection process was grueling, designed to weed out all but the most determined and capable candidates. The training was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She learned advanced combat techniques, underwater demolition, parachuting, and survival skills. Every day brought new challenges that pushed her physical and mental limits. Many of her male counterparts initially doubted her abilities, but Sarah's consistent performance gradually earned their grudging respect. During one particularly challenging exercise in the mountains of California, Sarah demonstrated the qualities that would define her military career. Her team was tasked with completing a 48-hour survival exercise with minimal equipment. As the team leader, Sarah had to navigate treacherous terrain, find water sources, and keep her team motivated despite exhaustion and harsh weather conditions. On the second night, one of her teammates suffered a severe ankle injury during a night navigation exercise. The injured soldier couldn't walk, and the extraction point was still 12 miles away through difficult mountain terrain. Some team members suggested calling for emergency evacuation, but Sarah knew this would result in automatic failure for the entire team. Instead, she organized a rotation system where team members took turns carrying their injured colleague. She led by example, taking the heaviest shifts herself despite being the smallest person in the group. For 8 hours, they moved through the darkness, with Sarah constantly encouraging her team and adjusting their route to avoid the most dangerous terrain. When they finally reached the extraction point, the training instructors were amazed. Not only had they completed the exercise successfully, but they had done so while ensuring no team member was left behind. Sarah's leadership during this crisis became legendary among the training staff and firmly established her reputation as someone who never gave up on her teammates. After completing SEAL training, Sarah was assigned to a Special Operations Unit based in Virginia. Her first deployment took her to Afghanistan, where her team conducted reconnaissance missions and worked with local forces to gather intelligence on terrorist activities. The work was dangerous and demanding, but Sarah thrived in the challenging environment. Her small stature became an advantage in many situations. She could move through tight spaces that larger team members couldn't navigate, and local populations were often less intimidated by her presence, making it easier to gather intelligence. Her teammates learned to appreciate her unique skills and completely trusted her abilities. During one mission in a remote village, Sarah's team was tasked with gathering information about a suspected terrorist cell. The mission required infiltrating a compound where women and children were present, making it crucial to avoid civilian casualties. Sarah's presence on the team proved invaluable, as she could interact with the local women and children in ways that her male teammates couldn't. The mission was successful, leading to the capture of several high-value targets and the prevention of a planned terrorist attack. Sarah's contribution was recognized with a commendation, and she quickly gained a reputation as one of the most effective operators in her unit. However, success in the field didn't shield Sarah from the challenges she faced within the military hierarchy. Despite her proven abilities and stellar service record, some officers and enlisted personnel struggled to accept a woman in the elite SEAL community. She encountered skepticism, inappropriate comments, and occasional outright hostility from those who believed special operations should remain an exclusively male domain. Sarah handled these challenges with the same determination she brought to her missions. She never responded to provocation with anger or complaints. Instead, she let her performance speak for itself, consistently exceeding expectations and proving her worth through action rather than words. Her approach began to change minds gradually. Younger service members looked up to her as a role model, and even some of her initial critics came to respect her professionalism and capability. However, not everyone was willing to accept change, and tension continued to simmer beneath the surface. The incident that would change everything began on a routine training exercise at a joint military facility in North Carolina. Sarah's unit was participating in a multi-service training program designed to improve coordination between different branches of the military. The exercise involved Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine personnel working together on various scenarios. From the beginning, Sarah sensed hostility from some of the Army personnel involved in the training. A group of soldiers, led by a sergeant named Marcus Webb, made no effort to hide their disapproval of her presence. Webb was a large man with a reputation for being a tough soldier, but also someone known for his old-fashioned views about women in combat roles. During the first few days of training, Webb and his followers subjected Sarah to constant scrutiny and criticism. They questioned her decisions during exercises, made snide comments about her size, and generally tried to undermine her confidence. Sarah ignored their behavior, focusing on completing the training objectives successfully. The training scenarios became increasingly complex, testing the participants' ability to work together under pressure. Sarah's performance was consistently excellent, and she often found herself in leadership roles during the exercises. This seemed to increase the resentment from Webb's group, who appeared threatened by her competence. On the fourth day of training, the participants were engaged in a complex urban warfare simulation. The exercise was designed to test their ability to clear buildings while minimizing civilian casualties. Sarah was assigned as the team leader for one of the assault groups, responsible for coordinating with other teams to secure a mock terrorist stronghold. The simulation went well initially, with Sarah's team moving efficiently through the urban environment. Her tactical decisions were sound, and her communication with other teams was clear and effective. However, as the exercise progressed, Webb's team began deviating from the planned coordination protocols. Instead of following the established communication procedures, Webb's soldiers started taking independent action that put other teams at risk. When Sarah attempted to coordinate with them over the radio, Webb responded with dismissive and unprofessional language. The situation was becoming dangerous, even in a training environment. Sarah made the decision to physically coordinate with Webb's team to ensure the exercise could continue safely. She moved to their position and attempted to discuss the coordination issues face to face. Webb's response was aggressive and inappropriate, making it clear that he had no intention of following her leadership or respecting the chain of command that had been established for the exercise. The confrontation escalated quickly. Webb began making personal attacks about Sarah's qualifications and her right to be in special operations. His teammates gathered around, creating an intimidating circle around Sarah. The training exercise had essentially stopped as other participants watched the confrontation unfold. Sarah maintained her composure despite the verbal assault. She attempted to redirect the conversation back to the training objectives and the importance of working together professionally. However, Webb seemed determined to provoke a reaction that would discredit her in front of the other service members. The situation reached a breaking point when Webb made a particularly offensive comment about women in the military. Several other participants tried to intervene and defuse the situation, but the damage had been done. The training exercise was halted, and all participants were ordered to return to the base for debriefing. That evening, Sarah reflected on the day's events in her quarters. She had encountered resistance and prejudice before, but never such open hostility in a training environment. She knew that how she handled this situation would have implications far beyond this single incident. Other women in the military were watching, and her response would either reinforce stereotypes or help break them down. She decided to address the situation through proper channels, filing a formal complaint about the unprofessional conduct that had disrupted the training exercise. Sarah documented the specific incidents, focusing on how Webb's behavior had compromised the training objectives and created a hostile environment that affected all participants. The response from the command structure was mixed. Some officers took her complaints seriously and initiated an investigation into the incident. However, others seemed more concerned about avoiding controversy than addressing the underlying issues. Sarah realized that the battle she was fighting was bigger than just one confrontational sergeant. As the investigation proceeded, Sarah continued participating in the training exercises. However, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Some participants went out of their way to show support for her, while others seemed to distance themselves from any potential controversy. The unity that was supposed to be built through joint training had been replaced by division and tension. Webb and his supporters became more subtle in their harassment, finding ways to undermine Sarah without creating obvious incidents that could be documented. They would arrive late for briefings when she was leading them, ask unnecessary questions that wasted time, and generally create an atmosphere of non-cooperation that made effective training nearly impossible. Sarah found herself in an impossible situation. Continuing to file complaints would likely result in her being labeled as someone who couldn't work with others. However, ignoring the behavior would send the message that such conduct was acceptable and would likely embolden others to act similarly. The training program was scheduled to culminate in a major field exercise that would test everything the participants had learned. All the different service branches would work together in a complex scenario designed to simulate real-world combat conditions. Sarah knew this exercise would be crucial for her reputation and her future in special operations. As the final exercise approached, Sarah prepared herself mentally and physically for what she knew would be the most challenging test of her career. She reviewed all the training materials, studied the terrain where the exercise would take place, and practiced the skills that would be required. Most importantly, she prepared herself for the possibility that some participants might try to sabotage her performance. The night before the final exercise, Sarah sat in her quarters writing a letter to her parents. She told them about the challenges she was facing and her determination to succeed despite the obstacles. She wrote about her belief that her service was making a difference, not just for national security, but for all the women who would follow in her footsteps. She sealed the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, not planning to send it unless something went wrong. Sarah had always been someone who faced challenges head-on, and she wasn't about to change that now. Tomorrow's exercise would be another test, and she was determined to pass it with distinction. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From the small military town where she grew up to the elite ranks of the Navy SEALs, every step had been a battle to prove herself. Tomorrow would be no different, but she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The alarm clock beside her bed was set for 0430 hours. In just a few hours, she would begin what might be the most important test of her military career. Sarah closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, using the mental preparation techniques she had learned during SEAL training. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would face it with the same courage and determination that had brought her this far. The morning of the final exercise dawned cold and gray, with a thick fog hanging over the training area. Sarah woke before her alarm, as she always did on important days. Her body was already conditioned to wake up early, a habit formed through years of military discipline. She lay in bed for a moment, listening to the sounds of the base coming to life around her. After a quick shower and breakfast, Sarah gathered her gear and headed to the briefing room. The final exercise was designed to be the most challenging test of the entire training program. Teams would be inserted into a large wilderness area where they would have to complete multiple objectives while being hunted by opposing forces played by experienced military personnel. The briefing room was filled with tension as participants from all service branches gathered for final instructions. Sarah took her usual seat near the front, her gear organized and ready. She noticed Webb and his supporters sitting together on the opposite side of the room, occasionally glancing in her direction with expressions of barely concealed hostility. Colonel Martinez, the overall exercise commander, stood at the front of the room with a detailed map of the training area displayed behind him. He was a seasoned officer with multiple combat deployments and a reputation for running extremely realistic training exercises. Sarah respected his professionalism and hoped he would ensure fair treatment during the exercise. The colonel explained that teams would be dropped at different points around a 50-square-mile area of mountainous terrain. Each team had multiple objectives to complete within a 72-hour timeframe while avoiding capture by the hunter teams. The objectives included rescuing simulated hostages, gathering intelligence, destroying mock targets, and ultimately reaching an extraction point. Sarah was assigned to lead a mixed team of 8 personnel from different service branches. Looking at her team roster, she was pleased to see several individuals she had worked well with during previous exercises. However, she also noticed that 2 of Webb's supporters, Corporal James and Private Rodriguez, were assigned to her team. The assignment wasn't accidental. Sarah realized that Webb and his supporters had likely influenced the team assignments to create maximum difficulty for her. Having potentially hostile team members would make completing the objectives much more challenging, but Sarah was determined not to let it affect her performance. After the briefing, teams had 2 hours to plan their approach and prepare their equipment. Sarah gathered her team in a separate room and began reviewing the maps and objectives. She tried to create an atmosphere of cooperation and mutual respect, emphasizing that their success depended on everyone working together effectively. Most of her team members responded positively to her leadership style. They contributed ideas for the mission plan and seemed genuinely committed to achieving their objectives. However, Corporal James and Private Rodriguez remained largely silent, answering direct questions but offering no initiative or suggestions. Sarah's plan was methodical and realistic. She proposed moving through the terrain in a pattern that would allow them to complete their objectives efficiently while minimizing their exposure to the hunter teams. She assigned specific roles to each team member based on their individual strengths and experience. The team would start by moving to a hidden observation point where they could gather intelligence on hunter team movements. From there, they would proceed to their first objective, a simulated hostage rescue at an abandoned building complex. After completing the rescue, they would move to destroy a mock weapons cache before heading to their final extraction point. As Sarah explained each phase of the plan, she watched her team members carefully. Most of them asked intelligent questions and offered useful suggestions. However, she noticed that James and Rodriguez exchanged meaningful glances whenever she outlined particularly risky parts of the mission. The transportation to the insertion point was tense. Sarah's team rode in a military helicopter with 2 other teams, and the noise made conversation impossible. She used the flight time to review her maps one more time and mentally rehearse the most critical parts of their mission plan. Looking out the helicopter window, Sarah could see the rugged terrain where they would be operating. Dense forests covered steep hillsides, broken by occasional clearings and rocky outcroppings. Several abandoned buildings were scattered throughout the area, remnants of old logging operations that would serve as objectives and landmarks during the exercise. The helicopter insertion went smoothly, with Sarah's team being dropped at a small clearing surrounded by thick forest. As soon as the helicopter departed, she gathered her team in a defensive circle and began implementing their plan. The forest was quiet except for natural sounds, but Sarah knew that hunter teams were already moving to locate and eliminate the various exercise teams. Their first movement was a careful advance toward the observation point Sarah had selected from the maps. The terrain was more challenging than expected, with steep slopes and thick undergrowth that slowed their progress. Sarah maintained communication discipline, using hand signals whenever possible and keeping radio transmissions to a minimum. After 2 hours of careful movement, they reached their observation point without being detected. The position offered excellent views of the valley below, where intelligence reports suggested hunter teams might establish checkpoints. Sarah organized her team into observation shifts while she studied the terrain and refined their approach to the first objective. The hostage rescue scenario was located in a group of abandoned buildings about 3 miles away. Sarah's surveillance revealed that hunter teams had indeed established positions around the objective, making a direct approach extremely dangerous. She modified her plan to approach from an unexpected direction that would require more difficult terrain but offer better concealment. As they prepared to move toward their first objective, Sarah noticed that James and Rodriguez seemed unusually interested in their radio communications. Both men volunteered to handle communication duties, which struck Sarah as suspicious since they had shown little initiative in other areas. She made a mental note to monitor their actions more closely. The movement toward the hostage rescue site took most of the afternoon. Sarah's team moved carefully through dense forest, taking advantage of every bit of natural concealment. They encountered signs of other teams, including some that had obviously been captured by hunter forces, but managed to avoid detection themselves. As they approached the objective area, Sarah could see why this location had been chosen for the exercise. The abandoned buildings provided multiple entry and exit routes, but they were also positioned in a way that made them easy to defend. Hunter teams had clearly established overlapping fields of fire that would make any rescue attempt extremely challenging. Sarah spent an hour observing the target area and identifying the positions of the opposing forces. She counted at least 6 hunter team members positioned around the buildings, with probably more inside the structures themselves. The simulated hostages were being held in the central building, which was the most heavily defended position. Her plan called for a diversionary attack on the eastern side of the complex while the main rescue team approached from the west. 2 team members would create noise and movement on the eastern side to draw attention, while Sarah led 4 others in the actual rescue attempt. James and Rodriguez would remain in overwatch positions to provide covering fire if needed. As they prepared to execute the plan, Sarah briefed each team member on their specific responsibilities. She emphasized the importance of timing and coordination, explaining that success depended on everyone executing their roles precisely. The diversionary team would begin their demonstration at exactly 1800 hours, giving the rescue team a narrow window to reach the hostages. The plan began smoothly, with the diversionary team creating convincing sounds of an attack on the eastern side of the complex. Hunter team members moved to respond to the apparent threat, reducing the defenses around the central building. Sarah's rescue team moved quickly through the reduced security perimeter and reached the building where the hostages were located. However, as they prepared to enter the building, everything went wrong. Instead of providing covering fire from their overwatch positions, James and Rodriguez began transmitting their team's location over the radio. Sarah realized immediately that they were betraying the team's position to the hunter forces. The betrayal put Sarah's entire team in immediate danger. Hunter team members who had been responding to the diversion quickly returned and began surrounding the central building. Within minutes, Sarah's team found themselves trapped with no clear escape route. Sarah made a quick decision to complete the hostage rescue despite the deteriorating situation. She led her remaining loyal team members into the building and successfully reached the simulated hostages. However, as they prepared to evacuate, hunter forces launched a coordinated attack on their position. The firefight that followed was intense but brief. Using blank ammunition and laser simulation equipment, the exercise replicated the chaos and confusion of real combat. Sarah's team fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and surrounded. One by one, her team members were eliminated by the hunter forces until only Sarah remained with the hostages. Realizing that the mission was compromised beyond recovery, Sarah made the decision to surrender the hostages and accept defeat. However, as she emerged from the building with her hands raised, the hunter team's response was unexpectedly aggressive. Instead of simply accepting her surrender according to exercise rules, they began treating her with unnecessary roughness. Webb had arrived with the hunter reinforcements and was clearly directing the aggressive treatment. Under the pretense of exercise realism, he ordered his men to physically restrain Sarah in a manner that was both unnecessary and inappropriate for a training scenario. When Sarah protested the excessive force, Webb claimed she was resisting surrender and ordered his men to increase their aggression. The situation escalated quickly beyond any reasonable training scenario. Sarah found herself being roughly handled by multiple soldiers while Webb shouted orders that seemed designed more to humiliate than to achieve any legitimate training objective. Other exercise participants who witnessed the incident seemed uncertain about whether to intervene or treat it as part of the scenario. Sarah's military training had taught her when to fight and when to submit to superior force. Understanding that resistance would only make the situation worse, she complied with all orders while clearly stating that she was surrendering according to exercise rules. However, her compliance seemed to encourage even more aggressive treatment from Webb's team. The incident reached its climax when Webb ordered Sarah to be forced to the ground in what he claimed was a standard prisoner control technique. However, the force used was clearly excessive for a training exercise, and Sarah found herself being slammed face-first into the rocky ground with unnecessary violence. As Sarah hit the ground hard, several things happened simultaneously. The pain from the impact was real and significant, leaving her temporarily stunned. Blood began flowing from cuts on her face where she had struck the rocks. Most importantly, something inside her snapped at the realization that this was no longer about training or military exercise. Webb and his supporters stood over Sarah as she lay on the ground, apparently satisfied that they had finally succeeded in humiliating the woman who had challenged their assumptions about military roles. They began making comments that made it clear their actions were motivated by personal prejudice rather than any legitimate training purpose. However, they had seriously underestimated the person they were dealing with. Sarah Martinez had not endured years of brutal SEAL training and multiple combat deployments to be defeated by playground bullies in military uniforms. As she lay on the ground bleeding, her mind was already calculating her response to this assault. The other exercise participants watched in stunned silence as the situation unfolded. Many of them recognized that what they were witnessing had gone far beyond any reasonable training scenario. Some began moving closer, apparently intending to intervene if the situation deteriorated further. Sarah slowly pushed herself up from the ground, blood streaming from cuts on her face and her uniform torn from the rough treatment. As she stood, her posture and expression made it clear that something fundamental had changed. The compliant prisoner who had been forced to the ground was gone, replaced by a combat-trained warrior who had reached her breaking point. Webb seemed to sense the change in Sarah's demeanor, but his arrogance prevented him from understanding the danger he had created. Instead of backing down, he continued his verbal assault, apparently believing that physical dominance had broken Sarah's spirit. He made the fatal mistake of reaching toward her again, intending to force her back to the ground. Sarah's response was swift and decisive. Years of combat training took over as she deflected Webb's reaching hand and delivered a precise counterattack that dropped him to the ground in seconds. Her movement was so fast and controlled that most observers didn't immediately understand what had happened. The sudden reversal of the situation caught everyone by surprise. Webb's supporters, who had been confidently participating in what they thought was a harmless humiliation, suddenly found themselves facing a highly trained special operations warrior who had been pushed beyond her tolerance for abuse. Sarah stood over Webb's prone form, her training and experience clearly visible in her controlled breathing and ready stance. Blood still flowed from her facial cuts, but her eyes were now focused and determined. The victim had become the victor in a matter of seconds, and everyone present understood that the dynamics of the situation had changed completely. The silence that followed was broken only by Webb's groans as he struggled to understand what had happened to him. His supporters took several steps backward, suddenly uncertain about their own safety. The other exercise participants moved closer, recognizing that they were witnessing something significant that would be talked about for years to come. Sarah looked around at the gathered faces, her expression calm but unmistakably dangerous. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, but she felt no regret about her actions. Years of abuse and discrimination had led to this moment, and she was prepared to face whatever consequences might follow. The training exercise had effectively ended, but something much more important had begun. Sarah Martinez had sent a clear message that she would not be intimidated, humiliated, or defeated by those who questioned her right to serve her country. The question now was how the military hierarchy would respond to her decisive action. The moments following Sarah's defensive action stretched like hours as everyone processed what had just occurred. Webb lay on the ground, clutching his ribs and struggling to breathe after Sarah's precisely delivered counterstrike. His face showed a mixture of pain, shock, and disbelief that a woman half his size had neutralized him so completely. Sarah remained in her defensive stance, her eyes scanning the faces around her. She could see the mixture of emotions reflected in their expressions: surprise, respect, fear, and uncertainty about what would happen next. Her SEAL training had taught her to always be aware of multiple threats, and she maintained her readiness while assessing the situation. Corporal James and Private Rodriguez, who had betrayed her team's position earlier, now seemed frozen in place. They had expected to witness Sarah's humiliation and defeat, not her dramatic transformation into a formidable opponent. Their earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a dawning realization that they had seriously misjudged the person they were dealing with. The first person to move was Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, the exercise commander, who had arrived with the Hunter Force reinforcements. His experienced eyes quickly assessed the situation, taking in Sarah's bloodied but determined appearance, Webb's prone position, and the tense atmosphere among all the participants. "Stand down, everyone," Colonel Martinez commanded in a voice that carried absolute authority. Exercise terminated. All personnel returned to base immediately for debriefing. His tone made it clear that this was not a request but an order that would be followed without question. As the various participants began organizing for the return trip, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax slightly from her combat-ready posture. The immediate threat had passed, but she knew that the real battle was just beginning. Her actions would be scrutinized by military investigators, and her future career hung in the balance. Webb was helped to his feet by his supporters, his face twisted with pain and humiliation. As he looked at Sarah, his expression promised that this confrontation was far from over. He had been publicly defeated by someone he considered inferior, and his pride would demand some form of revenge. The helicopter ride back to base was conducted in complete silence. Sarah sat with the other exercise participants, but she could feel the weight of their stares. Some looked at her with newfound respect, recognizing the skill and courage she had displayed. Others seemed uncertain or even hostile, viewing her actions as an unacceptable escalation of what should have been a routine training incident. Upon arrival at the base, Sarah was immediately escorted to the medical facility for treatment of her facial injuries. The cuts from her impact with the rocks were cleaned and bandaged, but the medical staff noted that her injuries were consistent with significant force being applied. Their medical report would become an important piece of evidence in the investigation that was sure to follow. While receiving medical treatment, Sarah had time to reflect on the events of the day and their potential consequences. She knew that her military career was now at a critical juncture. Some would view her actions as justified self-defense, while others would see them as an unacceptable assault on a fellow service member. After medical treatment, Sarah was taken to a secure briefing room where Colonel Martinez was waiting with several other senior officers. The atmosphere was formal and serious, making it clear that this was the beginning of an official investigation rather than a casual discussion of training events. Colonel Martinez began by asking Sarah to provide a detailed account of everything that had occurred during the exercise, starting from the initial briefing and continuing through the final confrontation. Sarah spoke clearly and precisely, providing facts without editorial commentary or emotional language. She described the planning phase, the suspicious behavior of James and Rodriguez, the betrayal of her team's position, and the escalating aggression of Webb's actions during her capture. Most importantly, she explained how Webb's treatment had gone far beyond any reasonable training scenario and had become a personal assault. The investigating officers asked detailed questions about each phase of the incident, paying particular attention to the final confrontation. They wanted to understand exactly what had provoked Sarah's defensive response and whether her actions could be justified under military regulations regarding self-defense. Sarah explained that Webb's final grab for her had triggered her defensive training, especially coming after the unnecessarily violent treatment she had already endured. She emphasized that her response had been proportionate and controlled, designed to neutralize the threat without causing unnecessary harm. As the investigation continued, other witnesses were interviewed separately. Many of the exercise participants confirmed Sarah's account of the excessive force used during her initial capture. Several testified that Webb's behavior had clearly gone beyond any legitimate training purpose and had appeared motivated by personal animosity. However, not all testimony was favorable to Sarah. James and Rodriguez, along with some of Webb's other supporters, claimed that Sarah had been insubordinate and resistant during the exercise. They portrayed Webb's actions as necessary to maintain order and discipline during what they characterized as a routine prisoner handling scenario. The conflicting accounts created a complex picture that would require careful analysis by the investigating team. Military justice demanded thorough examination of all evidence before reaching any conclusions about the appropriateness of anyone's actions during the incident. Over the following days, Sarah was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. She remained on base but was relieved of all training duties and confined to quarters except for meals and required meetings with investigators. The isolation gave her time to think but also increased her anxiety about her future. During her confinement, Sarah received visits from several unexpected sources. Some of her SEAL teammates traveled to the base to show their support and testify about her character and capabilities. Their testimony would prove crucial in establishing Sarah's reputation as a disciplined and professional soldier. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Torres, one of the few other women in special operations, also came to offer support and advice. She had faced similar challenges during her own career and understood the unique pressures that Sarah was experiencing. Her guidance helped Sarah maintain her mental strength during the difficult waiting period. "What you did out there was necessary," Commander Torres told Sarah during one of their conversations. "But now you have to fight a different kind of battle. The military system will test whether you can handle this situation with the same professionalism you showed in combat." Sarah appreciated the support, but she also understood the broader implications of her situation. Her case was being watched closely by women throughout the military who saw her as a symbol of their own struggles for acceptance and equal treatment. The pressure to handle everything perfectly was enormous. The investigation expanded as more evidence came to light. Medical records documented the extent of Sarah's injuries and confirmed that excessive force had been used during her initial capture. Radio transcripts revealed the betrayal by James and Rodriguez, supporting Sarah's account of the compromised mission. Security camera footage from around the base also provided important evidence. The cameras had captured conversations between Webb and his supporters before the exercise, revealing their intention to target Sarah specifically. This evidence suggested premeditation and significantly undermined claims that the incident had been a spontaneous training evolution. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the issues went far deeper than a single confrontation between two soldiers. The evidence revealed a pattern of harassment and discrimination that had been building throughout the training program. Sarah's case had simply brought these underlying problems to the surface. Webb's military record also came under scrutiny during the investigation. While he had a reputation as a tough soldier, investigators discovered several previous incidents involving inappropriate behavior toward female personnel. These incidents had been handled quietly through counseling and reprimands, but they established a pattern of problematic conduct. The investigation team also examined the broader culture within the training program and found evidence of systemic issues regarding the integration of women into special operations roles. Some instructors and participants had expressed doubts about women's capabilities, creating an environment where harassment and discrimination could flourish. After 2 weeks of intensive investigation, the findings were compiled into a comprehensive report that would be reviewed by senior military commanders. The report would determine not only Sarah's fate but also whether broader changes would be implemented to prevent similar incidents in the future. Sarah was called to a meeting with Colonel Martinez and several other senior officers to receive the preliminary findings of the investigation. As she entered the briefing room, she could see from their expressions that the news would be significant, though she couldn't determine whether it would be favorable or devastating. Petty Officer Martinez, Colonel Martinez began formally, "The investigation into the training incident has been completed, and I want to share the findings with you before they are officially released." His tone was neutral, giving no indication of what was coming. The colonel explained that the investigation had found clear evidence of harassment and excessive force directed at Sarah throughout the training program. Webb's actions during the final confrontation had been determined to be far outside the bounds of acceptable training procedures and constituted assault under military law. Sarah's defensive response had been ruled justified and proportionate under the circumstances. The investigation found that she had attempted to de-escalate the situation through proper channels before being forced to defend herself physically. Her actions had shown remarkable restraint considering the provocation she had endured. However, the colonel also explained that Sarah's case had highlighted serious institutional problems that would require ongoing attention. While she had been cleared of wrongdoing, the incident had raised questions about the military's readiness to fully integrate women into all combat roles. "Your actions were justified, Petty Officer Martinez," Colonel Martinez concluded, "but they've also started a conversation that was long overdue. The military is going to have to examine how we prepare all service members for the integration that's already happening." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at the news. While she had been vindicated, she understood that her situation was far from resolved. The formal conclusion of the investigation was just the beginning of a longer process that would determine her future in the military. The official report recommended several actions beyond clearing Sarah of wrongdoing. Webb would face court-martial proceedings for assault and conduct unbecoming a non-commissioned officer. James and Rodriguez would face disciplinary action for betraying their team during the exercise and providing false testimony during the investigation. More importantly, the report recommended comprehensive changes to training programs involving mixed-gender participants. New protocols would be established to prevent harassment and ensure that all personnel understood the professional standards expected during joint training exercises. Sarah's commanding officer from her SEAL unit arrived at the base to personally escort her back to her home station. During their flight, he explained that while she had been cleared of wrongdoing, the incident had generated significant attention at the highest levels of military command. "You did what you had to do," her commander told her, "and everyone who knows you understands that. But now you're going to be under a microscope for a while. Every action you take will be scrutinized by people looking for evidence to support their preconceived notions about women in special operations." Sarah understood the challenge ahead of her. She would have to prove herself all over again, not just as a capable operator but as someone who could handle the pressure and attention that came with her newfound notoriety. The real test of her strength would come in the months ahead as she returned to operational duties. The flight back to her home base gave Sarah time to process everything that had happened and prepare for the next phase of her career. She had survived the immediate crisis, but she knew that the battle for acceptance and respect would continue for years to come. As the aircraft approached her home base, Sarah could see familiar landmarks that reminded her why she had chosen military service in the first place. She was returning as a different person than when she had left for training, stronger, more confident, and with a clearer understanding of the challenges she would face as a woman in special operations. Sarah's return to her home base was met with a mixture of curiosity and respect from her fellow SEALs. Word of her confrontation had spread throughout the special operations community, and everyone wanted to see how she would handle the aftermath of what had become a legendary incident. Her teammates welcomed her back with the quiet professionalism that characterized their unit, but she could sense the underlying tension about what her experience might mean for all of them. The first few weeks back were challenging as Sarah readjusted to her normal duties while dealing with the ongoing attention from her case. Military investigators continued to interview her as part of the broader institutional review that her incident had triggered. Media attention was also building, though the military worked hard to keep specific details confidential to protect operational security. Sarah's commanding officer, Captain Michael Rodriguez, called her to his office shortly after her return to discuss her future with the unit. Captain Rodriguez was a respected leader who had commanded special operations teams for over 15 years. He had personally recruited Sarah for the unit and had been one of her strongest supporters throughout her career. "Martinez, I want you to know that nothing about your status with this unit has changed," Captain Rodriguez began. "You're still one of our most capable operators, and I have complete confidence in your abilities. However, I also need to prepare you for the reality that your situation has attracted attention we normally try to avoid." The captain explained that senior military leadership was using Sarah's case as a catalyst for broader changes in how women were integrated into special operations roles. While this attention could benefit future women seeking similar positions, it also meant that Sarah's every action would be scrutinized more closely than ever before. "You're going to be a symbol whether you want to be or not," Captain Rodriguez told her. "The question is what kind of symbol you choose to be. You can let the pressure consume you, or you can use it as motivation to become an even better operator than you already are." Sarah appreciated her commander's direct approach and honest assessment of her situation. She had always preferred clear communication over diplomatic ambiguity, and Captain Rodriguez's words helped her understand exactly what she was facing in the months ahead. Her first operational assignment after returning came sooner than expected. Intelligence had identified a high-value target in a Middle Eastern country, and Sarah's team was tasked with conducting a precision raid to capture or eliminate the terrorist leader. The mission would be her first real test of whether the traumatic training incident had affected her operational capabilities. As her team prepared for deployment, Sarah threw herself into mission planning with renewed intensity. She studied satellite imagery, intelligence reports, and tactical assessments with meticulous attention to detail. Her teammates noticed her increased focus and dedication, interpreting it as proof that the training incident had only strengthened her resolve. The mission briefing revealed a complex operation that would test every aspect of their training. The target was located in a heavily defended compound in an urban area where civilian casualties had to be avoided at all costs. The team would have to infiltrate undetected, neutralize multiple security threats, and extract their target without alerting the broader terrorist network in the area. Sarah was assigned as the second-in-command for the operation, responsible for coordinating with supporting elements and managing contingency plans if the primary approach failed. Her role required split-second decision-making and the ability to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, exactly the kind of pressure-filled environment where her recent experiences would either help or hinder her performance. The deployment began with a long-range flight to a forward operating base where the team would conduct final preparations and wait for optimal conditions to execute their mission. During the flight, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much she had changed since her first deployment years earlier. The confident but inexperienced operator had been replaced by a seasoned professional who understood both her capabilities and the challenges she would continue to face. At the forward operating base, Sarah's team joined other special operations units preparing for various missions throughout the region. She noticed immediately that word of her training incident had spread even to this remote location. Some operators treated her with obvious respect, while others seemed uncertain about how to interact with someone who had become such a controversial figure. The mission launched 3 days after their arrival, with Sarah's team inserting via helicopter under cover of darkness. The insertion went smoothly, and the team moved through the urban environment toward their target using carefully planned routes that avoided known surveillance points. Sarah's responsibility for coordinating with overhead surveillance and quick reaction forces kept her constantly busy throughout the approach. As they neared the target compound, the team encountered their first significant challenge. Intelligence reports had indicated minimal security presence, but surveillance revealed twice as many guards as expected. The team leader quickly modified their approach plan, but the changes required Sarah to coordinate new support arrangements in real time. Sarah's performance during this critical phase was flawless. She managed multiple communication channels simultaneously, coordinated with supporting aircraft, and adjusted contingency plans as the situation evolved. Her calm professionalism under pressure impressed even the most skeptical members of the broader task force. The assault on the target compound was swift and precise. Sarah's team neutralized the security threats efficiently and located their target within minutes of beginning the operation. However, as they prepared to extract, intelligence reports indicated that hostile reinforcements were approaching the area much faster than anticipated. Sarah found herself managing a complex extraction under pressure that tested every aspect of her training and experience. She coordinated with helicopter crews, managed the movement of wounded personnel, and ensured that no sensitive materials were left behind in the compound. The entire operation from assault to extraction was completed in under 20 minutes, a testament to the team's skill and preparation. The successful completion of such a high-stakes mission so soon after her traumatic training experience sent a clear message to anyone who had questioned Sarah's capabilities. Her performance had been exceptional under the most demanding circumstances, proving that her confrontation with Webb had not diminished her operational effectiveness. Upon returning from the deployment, Sarah found that her status within the special operations community had evolved significantly. The combination of her justified response to harassment and her exceptional performance on a critical mission had established her as a respected operator who could handle any challenge. However, the broader attention on her case was also creating new opportunities and responsibilities. military leadership approached her about participating in a comprehensive review of training protocols for mixed-gender special operations units. Her insights would be valuable in developing new standards that prevented harassment while maintaining the rigorous training necessary for special operations success. Sarah agreed to participate in the review process, understanding that her contribution could help prevent other women from experiencing the harassment she had endured. The review team included senior officers from all service branches, civilian specialists in military training, and representatives from various women's military organizations. The review process required Sarah to relive many of the difficult experiences she had endured during her career, but she approached the task with the same professionalism she brought to all her duties. Her detailed accounts of harassment incidents helped the review team understand how seemingly minor actions could accumulate into serious problems over time. Most importantly, Sarah's perspective helped the review team understand that women in special operations needed the same rigorous training as their male counterparts, not special accommodation or protection. Her message was that equality meant holding everyone to the same high standards while ensuring that training environments remained professional and respectful. The review team's recommendations would eventually be implemented across all military training programs, creating new protocols for preventing harassment while maintaining training effectiveness. Sarah's contribution to this process became one of her most significant achievements, potentially affecting thousands of future military personnel. As the months passed, Sarah's operational duties continued to expand. She was selected for increasingly complex missions that showcased her growing expertise and leadership capabilities. Her reputation as a reliable and innovative operator spread throughout the special operations community, opening doors to new opportunities and responsibilities. One of the most significant developments came when Sarah was approached about attending the prestigious Naval War College to earn a master's degree in strategic studies. The opportunity would prepare her for senior leadership positions and demonstrated the military's confidence in her potential for advancement to higher command levels. Sarah accepted the opportunity, understanding that her education would better prepare her to address the institutional challenges facing women in the military. Her experiences had taught her that lasting change required not just individual excellence but also systematic reforms implemented by knowledgeable leaders. The academic environment at the Naval War College provided Sarah with new perspectives on military history, strategy, and leadership. She excelled in her studies while also contributing unique insights based on her operational experience and her involvement in training reform initiatives. Her master's thesis focused on leadership challenges in integrated special operations units, drawing on both academic research and her personal experiences. The work was well received by faculty and fellow students, establishing Sarah as a thoughtful analyst in addition to her reputation as an exceptional operator. During her time at the War College, Sarah also began speaking at military conferences and educational institutions about her experiences and the lessons learned from her confrontation with harassment. Her speeches always emphasized the importance of professional standards and mutual respect while acknowledging the real challenges facing military integration efforts. The speaking opportunities allowed Sarah to influence a broader audience than she could reach through operational duties alone. Her message resonated particularly strongly with young women considering military careers, many of whom saw her as proof that they could succeed in even the most demanding military roles. After completing her master's degree, Sarah returned to operational duties with new responsibilities and a broader perspective on military leadership. She was promoted to senior enlisted rank and given supervisory authority over training programs for new SEAL candidates. Her role allowed her to directly influence the next generation of special operations personnel. In her new position, Sarah implemented many of the reforms that had emerged from the training review process. She worked to create training environments that maintained the necessary rigor while ensuring that all participants were treated with professional respect regardless of their gender or background. Sarah's approach to training emphasized that special operations success depended on teamwork and mutual support among operators who might have very different backgrounds and capabilities. Her personal example demonstrated that diversity could be a strength rather than a weakness when properly managed and supported. The training programs under Sarah's supervision consistently produced exceptional graduates who were better prepared for the challenges of modern special operations. Her methods were studied and adopted by training programs throughout the military, extending her influence far beyond her immediate responsibilities. Years after the training incident that had threatened to end her career, Sarah looked back on those events as a turning point that had ultimately made her stronger and more effective. The harassment she had endured and her response to it had tested her in ways that no operational mission could, preparing her for the leadership challenges she now faced. Sarah's story had become part of military lore, inspiring countless other women to pursue careers in special operations and other traditionally male-dominated fields. More importantly, her professional response to adversity had helped change institutional attitudes about women's capabilities and the importance of maintaining respectful training environments. The young woman who had once been knocked to the ground by hostile soldiers had risen to become one of the most respected leaders in special operations. Her journey demonstrated that true strength came not from avoiding challenges but from facing them with courage, professionalism, and determination to create positive change. As Sarah continued her military career, she carried the lessons learned from her experiences into every aspect of her service. She had proven that individual excellence could drive institutional change, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not against foreign enemies but against prejudice and discrimination within one's own organization. Her legacy would extend far beyond her own career, influencing military policies and attitudes for decades to come. The soldier who had been knocked down but refused to stay down had become a catalyst for positive change throughout the entire military structure, proving that sometimes the most powerful victories come from the courage to stand up and fight back when it matters most.